I think this video is out of touch. I think this video is completely out of touch. Like, what are you talking about? They're experimenting on things that might or might not go into Classic Plus. Why have so many people quit Classic WoW?
The other day, I put up a poll asking my audience which version of Classic WoW they're playing. The results were quite surprising to say the least. It turns out the top choice was that people are not playing Classic WoW at all. A whopping 40% of people said they've stepped away from the game entirely. 33 are playing Cataclysm Classic, 15 are playing Season of Discovery, and just 12 are still on Classic Era. So yes, we're seeing a huge population drop, but it's not exactly shocking. We always knew that by the time Cata Classic came around, interest in Classic WoW would wane. Cata isn't the cup of tea for many Classic WoW players. The ethos of a Classic WoW player is simple. Log in, slay some dragons with your friends, have a few beers, and score some loot. Rinse and repeat next week. Cataclysm still offers that experience, but the content isn't as casual friendly as it used to be, especially when you compare the heroic difficulties to Ulduar hard modes. Also, a significant chunk of the original Classic audience also love the old school leveling zones, rich with exploration and non-linear quest lines, but with Cataclysm's revamp of Azeroth, that essence is lost for some players. By the way guys, if you're still leveling up your character at Alts in Season of Discovery, Cataclysm or Era, be sure to check out the Rustic Spear add-on, the fastest leveling add-on that you can get, created by world record holding speed levelers. You can find the download link to that in the description. When Season of Discovery launched, it drew a staggering number of players, just under 500,000 logs. That's Wrath Classic level engagement. At peak times, you could easily see over 300 group requests on the LFG add-on on the highest population servers, but now SOD only has about half of its original population. Clearly, something went wrong.
I mean, okay, I don't know if I actually agree with that claim. That if something has a high initial interest and goes down, I don't necessarily agree. I think it's very natural to see a decline after a surge of popularity. So, for example, like, New World came out and no one knew what New World was yet. No one knew what it was. Like, it just kind of came out. Like, we had very little information on it. There wasn't like this super big alpha, beta phases where like people were playing and they knew everything. It was like kind of quiet. We heard about it and then it just dropped and everyone's like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then like everyone hopped on. Million concurrent players at one point peak. It's like, wow, that's a lot of people. You know, a lot of people wanted to check it out. And then it wasn't until later that people found that, well, okay, this game is fun, but it has a lot of big errors. So like, it's not really for me. And a lot of the people that were playing were never going to play in the long term anyway. They just had like a weekend off and they just want to like check it out. Or they like disregarded real life responsibilities for a few days because you can disregard real life responsibilities for a few days, but then they catch up to you. So you had to quit no matter what. So it was like a player base that was never actually able to play in the first place. I feel like that's the key that people miss. So when SOD comes out, there's this massive audience that likes Classic WoW that have played WoW in the past and it's quit. So like an estimation of how many people that have played World of Warcraft over the last 20 years is probably like 200 million players over the last 20 years. We probably have, say, like 5 million of those 200 million actually subscribed currently. But say like 200 million have played. So we have like 195 million untapped potential players that have played WoW before but aren't currently playing. So of that 195 million, we have Season of Discovery. And it's like, wow, it's this new product that's really interesting. Let me at least try it. And a lot of those players don't have the time in their lives to actually dedicate to a video game at all. But they tried it for like a weekend just because they were just like interested. And they were going to quit one way or another. So that's why I don't think it's necessarily a fair metric to say, well, you have a high amount of players and then it fell off. So what went wrong? It's like, well, did anything go wrong? Or were those players just checking it out because there was interest at one point? Now they have no time for a video game at all, but they were going to quit anyway, but they just wanted to try it to see what it was all about. And Season of Discovery was very quiet. We heard about it at BlizzCon. It launched a week later and it had a lot of initial hype. Of course, that's going to be the highest performing week, period. Same with New World. So yeah, I think I just overall disagree with that claim. I think it's a bit more complicated than that.
I've already made a whole video diving into the details, but to sum it up, SOD became everything Classic WoW players despise about retail. The current lineup of Classic WoW products just isn't hitting the mark for most players. Since the beginning of Classic, we've had a hardcore to semi-hardcore player base, much larger than people realise, These are the kind of players who won't cancel a raid night to attend their own child's piano recital. You know, the true heroes of World of Warcraft. Depending on your server, casual guilds are definitely in the minority on Cataclysm Classic, which you can easily see by checking out the server discords. And honestly, that's fine. This is exactly what Cataclysm Classic was designed to be, and it stayed true to that vision. If it made Classic Cataclysm easier, it would have alienated its core audience. Over the past 4 years, Classic WoW has cultivated a more hardcore community. Sure, with some exceptions, the game has been too easy for a lot of players, which has sparked a craving for more challenging content. But there's still a significant portion of Classic WoW's audience who prefer a more relaxed raiding experience. Season of Discovery was delivering that until Sunken Temple, which had an end boss more difficult to kill than Donald Trump.
Okay, you had to go there.
This is a major reason why so many people have walked away from Classic WoW. It just doesn't have that same broad appeal as it once did. In a recent interview, Blizzard explained that Season of Discovery was meant to be very experimental. Some things work great and others not so much. I'm almost inclined to give Blizzard a pass on this one. It's important to try new features and see what sticks. The lead developer even mentioned they were hesitant to label SOD as Classic Plus because getting it wrong could have led to major disappointment. Fair enough. There's a lot riding on Classic Plus. It has to be perfect because realistically it is the future of Classic WoW.
Yeah.
With some Pandaria Classic, that's not the future. That's exactly what the most of a Classic audience don't want.
Right.
But some of the features they added to Season of Discovery were doomed from the start. Like a Take That member trying to start a solo career when your name isn't Robbie Williams. Nightmare incursions, overcomplicating classes with too many abilities, and making the raids excessively difficult, these were brainless decisions that could only been made from developers that really don't get Classic WoW.
That's not a fair. That's not fair. That's not a fair statement. Like they're trying to limit tests specifically. They're going past the boundary so they know where the boundary is. They want to push the limits so they know where the limits are, right? They're saying, okay, let's make a raid really hard. Okay, players don't want that. Okay, let's dial it back next time. This is a learning process. I don't think that's fair to say that they're out of touch completely. They're taking this as an opportunity to see what works and what doesn't. I don't know about that.
Hopefully, after losing over 1 million subscribers, they finally learned that lesson. But this is what concerns me about the Classic dev team. Do they truly understand Classic WoW? Do they play enough to understand what players want? Are they familiar with other old school MMOs and why their communities remain loyal even when their games are so different?
Yeah, I honestly say, after listening to the dev interviews from the Classic devs, they are more in touch with Classic WoW than I expected them to be. Just from their tonality and references, they have a deep understanding of what's going on. That still doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. Of course they make mistakes. They make a lot of mistakes, but we're all human and we all make mistakes, and that's part of it. I made this reference the other day. I was like, we are blessed with the current Classic devs on the Classic WoW team. They are doing a phenomenal job. Yes, they still make mistakes, but they're correcting them and they're still striving forward for a better and better product. And there's a good amount of communication. There's consistent dev interviews being released to various YouTube channels. There's tweets. There's a new Twitter account that was just made. There's Josh with blue posts and with tweets happening all the time. We're really blessed with it. And the reason I can say that is because I've played retail for the last 20 years and it's been a very different story. Very different story. You guys know what I'm talking about. We are very lucky to have the devs that we do working on SOD and Classic. Period.
From modern MMOs like Retail WoW, do they get why Retail WoW isn't growing, hasn't for years and probably never will? Can they pass the old school MMO vibe check? Honestly, I think before anyone can join the Classic WoW dev team, they should have to prove that they've logged at least 10 days playtime on their account in Classic. That should be a minimum requirement. It's painfully clear that some members of the Classic WoW dev team are just going through the motions, with very little passion or interest in Classic. The features introduced in Season of Discovery make it obvious that whoever is calling the shots is completely out of touch with what the Classic WoW audience actually wants.
I think this video is out of touch. I think this video is completely out of touch. Like, what are you talking about? They're experimenting on things that might or might not go into Classic Plus. What? What are we going on about?
Unfortunately, this is the harsh reality of game development. When a new studio is trying to make a name for itself, they're driven by determination and passion, but once a company has been established for a few years, that fire often fades. Every game developer seems to have their peak. Blizzard with Wrath of the Lich King, Bethesda with Skyrim, CD Projekt Red with The Witcher 3, and then it's just all downhill from there. And bringing in new talent won't necessarily fix this, because the current climate of the video game industry is one where people are more likely to leave it than to join it. When you consider the future of Classic Plus is in the hands of Blizzard and the current Classic WoW dev team, it's hard to not feel uneasy, especially with the news that Activision Blizzard, Microsoft, or whatever the hell this corporate monstrosity they're called,
I think Clay does a solid job
now, is unionizing. Now, I'm not against worker unions. Blizzard is probably the perfect example of a company that needs one. But the downside is that bad developers who have no idea what they're doing might end up sticking around longer than they really should. A lot of Classic players are now left with nothing to play, and let's not forget that Season of Discovery is just getting started. It still has to go through every single phase of raid releases at endgame, which is going to take at least a year. So what are Classic players supposed to do for a whole year without a solid MMO to dive into? Sure, people will always come back to WoW, but Blizzard risks losing chunks of their subscriber base to other MMOs in the meantime. For now, many Classic players might have to accept their fate as an MMO refugee. I've already met plenty of people in other MMOs who admit they're WoW refugees. Maybe there's a silver lining here. Perhaps some players will discover an MMO they end up liking more than WoW, but the truth is, if Blizzard want Classic WoW to return to its former glory, they need to take some serious action. And fast. But anyway guys, my name is MetaGoblin. Until my next video, ciao.
What? Yeah. Yeah. For all the reasons I talked about in the video, I disagree with like most of this video. You know, I think I understand what he's trying to get at, but like the reality is, I think Blizzard is aiming towards a Classic Plus that we're going to enjoy, and SOD is like the foundations of that, and they're going to get some stuff wrong along the way, but I'm not saying the entire Classic WoW team is perfect, because they're not, and there's probably some people working there who shouldn't be. Sure, fine, but like there's a lot of people that are doing a great job on that team, so I don't know what the big, yeah, I'm gonna have to just overall disagree with the video.